Welcome to Advancing the Diaconate, a series devoted to highlighting the work of deacons and their ministries in the world and the church. Now, here is your host.
And hello, everyone. I'm Deacon John Ray of the Diocese of Atlanta. Welcome to this series called Advancing the Diaconate. This is the first in a series of videos and audio content that is meant to highlight Advancing the Diaconate, a campaign that's jointly undertaken by the Association for Episcopal Deacons and by the Fund for the Diaconate. I'm here with Archdeacon Carole Maddux, and for a lot of us deacons, Carole needs no introduction, but let me tell you just a little bit about her. She has extensive experience in advocacy, leadership, policy formation, and nonprofit management. She was ordained in the Episcopal Church as a deacon in 2006, and she's been an archdeacon in the Diocese of Atlanta for quite a few years, and was, if I can say something personal about her, was very instrumental in my formation. So, Carole, delighted to have you here to talk about this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So let's give everyone just another little brief introduction to you and your call as a deacon. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. That'll be easy because there's nothing I like to talk about more than being a deacon and the diaconate. I think like most deacons, my call, looking back, was extensive, but I didn't necessarily know I was called to be a deacon until about halfway through my formal discernment year, which, as you mentioned, was a really long time ago. And I can remember an instance in particular where I was reading a book about the diaconate. It may have been Ormond Plater's Many Servants book. And I was sitting in bed and my husband was trying to fall asleep next to me. And I'm getting more and more excited as I'm reading about these people and their lives and what they did in the context of both the church and Jesus. And all of a sudden I just start beating on my husband, which he probably didn't appreciate. And I said, I have found my people. And that's, I think, when I knew that I was truly called to the diaconate. And it's been just such a joy to be a deacon all these years. It's funny, I was asked recently in a COM meeting, believe it or not, how I knew I wasn't called to be a priest. And I'll keep the language clean, but during my formation, I had actually never even been to any ordination, not priest, deacon, bishop, nothing, and like probably most lay people. And during our formation, there was an ordination to the priesthood taking place that very same day, and so we all went and attended that. And during that, it was like, oh no. When I'm hearing the vows that the priests make, which are, awesome vows, but it was like, oh, that's not me at all. Mm-hmm. I am definitely here to have a special ministry for those on the margins. I'm not, for my ministry has not been so much parochial as it has been outside of the church. So that's just to give you a little bit of background on what some of my ministries have been. I've run a clinic, a charity clinic for the poor and the uninsured. I've been a deacon for the homeless in downtown Atlanta. I've also been a deacon for the Anglo-Catholics in downtown Atlanta. So that's a different marginalized group, I suppose.
Mm.
I've gone to Honduras, and now I mostly do advocacy work for, especially for the poor, but it's an interfaith advocacy group that works within the state of Georgia at state level policy.
And let's just call that out because you started that organization, the Georgia Interfaith Public Policy Center. And so that's really part of your nonprofit expertise. Which came first for you, Carole? Was it the nonprofit leaning, or was that you became ordained and jumped into the nonprofit side? I mean, talk about that piece.
I would say that was one of those pieces I was referencing at the beginning when I said, when you look back,
Mm-hmm.
you can see the roots of it all,
Mm-hmm.
Stretching often way back. But yeah, so when I have a master's in healthcare policy and administration. And when I first got out, I had student loans, not surprisingly,
Mm.
and I needed to pay them off. And so the best way to do that was to work as a consultant for mostly for-profit hospitals all over the country. And I was a consultant, and I was kind of a queen of cost shifting, going around and teaching for-profit hospitals how to squeeze even more money out of everybody. And it was just, one day I woke up and I realized that's really not what I went to college for. That's really not what I got my degree for. I wanted to improve healthcare and help people have more access, not less. And so, as I've put it to some people, in expiation for my sins, I jumped from that into working only in nonprofit.
Mm.
First for a community charity that's local, and then I worked in hospice for 6 years, a nonprofit hospice, which is important to say. And then from there went into the clinic work, the charity clinic. I got ordained. I guess I started the discernment process while I was still in hospice, but I got ordained shortly after I was about 2 years into working at the clinic.
Got it. So I guess the point of the story, it's hard to see where one starts and the other one stops, right? I mean, that's really
Absolutely. And when
yeah.
people, I'm Archdeacon for discernment in Atlanta. So I that's what I do. I talk with people who are trying to discern whether or not they have a call to the diaconate. And so those are the kind of threads that you're looking for in someone's life, that might lead them to understand, where they're called to. I'm happy to help people discern their call, no matter where it leads. I'm not here just to recruit for the diaconate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to, help people discern where their joy is and where the need of the world and the church is.
I love that. Let's get to why we're here, which is to talk about the advancing the diaconate campaign. Again, as I mentioned at the top, it's a joint enterprise endeavor between the Association for Episcopal Deacons and the Fund for the Diaconate. For those that don't know about these two organizations, let's just give a brief explanation of both.
So the Association for Episcopal Deacons is basically the professional organization for deacons. We were founded gosh, many years ago, and I really should know how many, but I don't. It was before I was a deacon, and I've been lucky enough to meet many of the pioneers, which were awesome, and are awesome. The initial reason is to help the church and deacons just kind of sort out who they are, and just what is this new animal, the diaconate, that we have renewed since the 1970s. So, and back then, of course, it was called the permanent diaconate or the vocational diaconate, to distinguish it from what more priests and laity were used to, which was the transitional diaconate. Now I like to say that only the transitional diaconate really should use a modifier. You know, the diaconate is the diaconate, and deacons are deacons, and the only ones you really need to identify as something different are the ones who are already planning and already called to go on to the priesthood. So, you know, I think throughout the years, and if you read Suzanne Watson Epting's book, Unexpected Consequences, then I think you can see some of that history and how AED has helped both the church and deacons navigate the changes within the diaconate as we've grown, not just in numbers, but also in understanding of our call. And so now the AED really is the professional organization for deacons. It's where deacons can go to find help with ministry, to find other deacons that can support or answer questions, to form a larger deacon community than just within a diocese, and to represent our our deacon community to the worldwide deacon community. That's another important part of AED. We've also really helped bishops and the church with things like developing the competencies that deacon formation is based upon. We're helping now to develop resources that will help deacons who don't speak English, for example, to get formation and to get the same support, to access all the resources that the English-speaking deacons have. So, and I see AED moving into whatever area the diaconate moves into, because we're here to support deacons. We're here to help deacons and the diaconate, whether it's through formation, whether it's in ministry, whether it's even in, to some extent, their personal lives, as we provide, emotional and collegial support for each other, or even as we retire and age, to help provide support for deacons through that. So it's really the AMA of the diaconate.
I like that. Now, and you've just answered my next question. I want to come back to the fund. I think that's where you were going in a second. But you just answered my next question, which I'm sure some people think professional association. Why do you need a professional association? I think you just answered that in terms of some of the efforts that AED uses to support deacons, developing competencies, etc.
Yes, we can get, just as deacons push people of faith outside of the pew, right? We call them into the world, we push them into the world, we lead them into the world, because it's so easy in a parish or a mission to become so inwardly focused, right? And we know that was not Jesus's focus, or it certainly wasn't his only focus. So that's how we help people, live into their baptismal vows. Well, the same thing can happen to the diaconate in a diocese. We can be so inwardly focused on what's going on in our diocese and our parishes and at our annual council and everything, and we forget the bigger, wider world and the bigger, wider community of deacons. When I see people come together at triennial, which is the every 3-year gathering of deacons that AED puts on, um, and they connect with people, with deacons from across the country who may be working in their same ministry or maybe have some of their same challenges, like young deacons or like deacons of color or women deacons or men deacons. I mean, the connections are just incredible and so joyful. I just love watching it. It's almost like summer camp for deacons.
I love that.
And we
You're
just,
right. Yeah.
and it's just really, really helpful. And this year, like the Diocese of Georgia and the Diocese of Atlanta, for the first time ever, came together and had a joint retreat of deacons. And I know you were there, John, and I think that it was so great for both of us, for both
Mhm.
groups, because it allows you to see larger possibilities. It allows you to make more friends, people who really get it. And it's truly soul feeding, I think, to do that. And so I think that's an important piece of what AED does.
Yeah, for sure. A couple pieces there I want to come back to, Carol, but let's give a quick overview of the fund for the diaconate. We're going to have the president of the fund, Keith McCoy, on a future episode, folks. But yeah, so but Carol, give everyone that doesn't know about the fund just a quick uh, uh, explanation of what the fund for the diaconate is all about.
Well, I'll do a teaser for Keith, but
Yeah.
do tune in for Keith, because the fund is an incredible organization, much older than AED, because its roots are in the deaconesses, and many years ago, and as I understand it, Keith will be able to talk to it with greater knowledge, but the deaconesses were women in the church who basically gave their lives to the church and to service. And yet when they retired, they were retiring in poverty. And so they kind of formed, in a way, their own AED to support each other. And the way they supported each other was creating essentially like a pension fund for the deaconesses. And out of course, when the deaconesses, when that order of sorts stopped, then there was still this pension fund, and so we use it to support deacons. And we can support deacons in many ways, other than we don't use it as a pension so much anymore. But when a deacon, whether it's in retirement or perhaps in formation even, becomes, has difficulty economically, they may have medical bills that they weren't expecting. We've had deacons who well into Social Security age are having to, drive school buses just to keep a roof over their heads. And so this is some of the areas that the fund supports deacons economically through grants. During COVID, they had specific COVID grants. And so I've been really happy to watch the fund grow and how they grow and really expand their vision of how deacons need help and how the fund can help. And it's been a joy to see that. It's also been a great joy to work with the fund. This is a historic coming together, and if anything, we should only be embarrassed that it took this long because they're both great organizations that support deacons, and it only makes sense for us to work hand in hand, even though we provide and approach that support from two different areas. But it's kind of like, if you have one hand supporting something and then you bring another hand in to support it, it's even got greater support.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the campaign. These two organizations have come together to initiate and develop this campaign. What's it all about? I mean, what's the purpose of the campaign? What's the goal of the campaign?
Well, the campaign basically has three goals, and that's to sustain the work that that we already do. It's to empower deacons by being able to go beyond what we already do. And it's to be able to transform. And when I say transform, I don't mean necessarily transform individual deacons. I'm talking, and I'm an incredible optimist and big thinker. Otherwise, I could never work in nonprofits. But I'm talking about transforming the world. I really believe that the diaconate is the order that is best situated to help the church transform itself, but also transform the world around the church, because that's our focus, is the world around the church. And so through this campaign, we're hoping to gain the resources that will allow the fund and AED to achieve those goals.
Yeah, would it be fair to say that, I guess to repurpose what you just said, that our dreams are bigger than our resources, and maybe that's the and it's not just our dreams. We think it's God's dreams too, right? For the
Yeah.
world and the church. So, and that's part of what underlines this campaign.
Absolutely. Yeah. AED and the fund, as I've described, has already done incredible work. But think about how much more we could do if we had more resources, more staff, more financial resources. Just we want to be able to reach out, and frankly, the diaconate is growing. And as it grows, it's going to have more challenges. We're going to have more deacons that may need help, and we need to position ourselves so that we can meet those challenges immediately.
Well, let's talk about that. Since that's one of the objectives of the campaign, is the initiative to get younger deacons and deacons of color. Talk about how the campaign fits into those goals.
So, as I've talked with deacons, and frankly, when I first entered formation and discernment too, I still had young children at home. And it was sometimes a struggle. I mean, I know it varies from diocese to diocese, but in our diocese, there were certain costs to formation and even to discernment that I had to take on myself. And, my family was not quite paycheck to paycheck, but close. And we were facing two college tuitions, not too far into the future and everything. And so it really did take, it was a challenge to meet some of that, and my parish helped me with that, thankfully. It was in a position to be able to help, and it was, of course, also very supportive. But we want to be able to. We recognize that young deacons and deacons of color, and I want to kind of expand that a little bit to deacons um, from other socioeconomic circumstances too.
Mhm.
I find, let me back up a little bit. I think most of us know at this point that the more diverse a group is, the more effective it is. It'll be able to approach problems and issues with a variety of experiences and with a variety of lenses. And that really helps when you're looking at effectiveness. The diaconate has been not that diverse. We skew a little, when you look at the demographics out of the church pension fund, we skew older, we skew female, we skew white, and and that makes us less effective for those very transformational aspects that I was talking about before. When I worked with the homeless in Atlanta, it was my dream. It hadn't happened yet, but it's my dream that one of those parishioners would actually eventually be ordained.
Mm.
Nobody knows what it's like to be homeless as much as someone who is homeless or has been homeless. And that's a voice that the church needs to hear from a position of authority and a position of governance. And that's not a voice we often hear in those positions. I just went to General Convention this year as a deputy, and I was really, really pleased to see how diverse the deputies are now in the Episcopal Church. Maybe because I'm so old, I can remember when you had to be male to be on the vestry. And we didn't even question what color your skin was.
Right.
So, if you were a woman, the most you could be is head of ECW or something, which really rankled with my mother, frankly. But, and eventually she was on a vestry, but that's another story. So I know we've had a huge transformation in our church in my lifetime, from the church men running the church to this beautiful tapestry
Mhm.
of Native Americans and African Americans and Puerto Ricans and Liberians and just people from all over, not just the United States, but all over the world coming together to govern the Episcopal Church. It was beautiful. And I think it really makes the church a much better church and much closer to Jesus' steps. So just as we're doing that with the church, we have to do that with the diaconate. But we have to also recognize that is going to, some people are going to have barriers in front of them that some of us did not, and we need to help lower those barriers. And this campaign will help lower those barriers, whether it's a need for childcare, a need for help with formation costs, whether it's a need for creating affinity groups so that you have a level of support outside of your own parish, diocese, geographic area. When I saw the young deacons get together at the triennial we had in 2019 at Rhode Island, I mean, that was pure spark,
Mhm.
and they've really taken off since then too,
Yeah,
which
sure.
is awesome. I remember the presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Scory, one time said to me that when deacons get involved, things happen. And man, when you get a whole bunch of deacons involved, things really happen.
Yeah, for sure. I'll quote John Thompson Corte, who said, "When two or three deacons are gathered in one place, watch out." So, and that's really, I'm glad you brought that up, and we're talking in this way because it's really part of this campaign, right? Is to create those sparks, that communication with each other, that interplay, the ability to get together, because being a deacon can be a lonely ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. I warn every formation class, and John, you've heard me, that first year is very hard.
Mhm.
Um, and part of it is because of the loneliness. Most of us will not be lucky enough or blessed enough to serve alongside another deacon. You think about it, most priests, when they become ordained, they're not immediately put out there all by themselves. They're usually go and become an associate priest and are working with a colleague. Now, I know that many of them also work uh, eventually, and perhaps most of their, if not almost all of their ministry alone in a parish. And I know that their call can also be very isolating and alone. But there's a lot more priests, frankly, right? So
Mhm.
we know that they get together through Credo. They have their seminary groups. They have learned how to support each other, even though they have a very challenging ministry too. We're we're such a young order, frankly, that we're learning the challenges of being a deacon. And one of those challenges is just what you said. It can be very lonely. There's not another deacon in your parish. Sometimes there's not another deacon for miles around.
Mm.
And you may be able to get together with your diocesan group of deacons once a year for deacon day or day with the bishop or the retreat or whatever. But long term, that may not be completely sustaining. So the more ways that we can help deacons find their community and find support, um, the better off not just the deacon will be, but the diaconate will be and the church will be.
Carol, one thing about deacons is when they think about resources being applied, they don't think about, this is my experience anyway, and I think you'll agree with me. They don't think about those resources coming to them. They think about those resources going to their ministries, because that's the first thing on their mind, right? So let's talk about how this campaign can help deacons in their ministries.
So I think one of the first ways it can help in their ministry is when you can get together with other deacons that also do that ministry. You know, um, I know, for instance, when I was with Church of the Common Ground, which is ministry with the homeless in the Diocese of Atlanta, we were a part of the whole ecclesia community. And so when we had issues, maybe with law enforcement or more subtly with power differentials and how to navigate that and how to make sure that you were uh, a parish, a spiritual home, not another social, center or social service. Um, I had other people I could go to about that. when my heart was breaking because yet another parishioner had been beaten up and raped, I had other people that I could go to with that, because it's not appropriate to do that with the parishioner, right? Deacons need that too. And when we have it, it enhances our ministry. Other ways that I envision, and again, all this depends on the resources that we actually get through this campaign. I envision maybe even seed money. I envision being able to say things like, you want to start a nonprofit, but you've never done that. You don't know how. Here's the resources. We have 50 deacons who have started a nonprofit. They know how to start it, how to make it its own independent 501c3, how to operate under a church's, nonprofit status for a while until it becomes independent. They know the difference. They know whether or not it's, what the pros and cons of staying under the church or going, becoming independent are. They know how to balance that along with their church life and their family life, or at least they know to be able to tell you it's hard.
Right.
It's impossible, but you just do it. That's ways that both a professional organization can really help. And, I can see the fund, and I'll let Keith speak to this because they are constrained by the laws of the state of New York. But I can also see the fund helping to provide maybe some bridge money when you're struggling with a new ministry on how to get it started, so that you can eat.
Right. Well, and just to throw in on this, folks, I'm on the board of the fund. We're governed by the laws of the state of New York, and the Attorney General of the state in New York. It takes a while to get charters changed. It took us years to get changed. It just did, to be able to issue formation grants for deacons that are in formation, who need that help with expenses around formation. So, not quite ready to extend that quite yet. It's going to take us a while if we get to that point. But I love the way you dream, Carole.
Yes, well, I do dream big and I do push, but it's all because, I know what the diaconate can do. When I hear Bishop Michael Curry, get excited about the diaconate, and I hope some of y'all, look up some of his videos where he's speaking about it. I mean, I'm right there with him. The diaconate is such an exciting place to be right now at this time in the church and at this time in the world. And we really need to do all we can to support each other. But believe me, I think that it's important that the church supports the diaconate too. Being a part of this campaign is not just to reach out to deacons, but it's to reach out to bishops, to parishes, to lay people. If you know or if you love a deacon, you can be a part of this campaign. If you just want to really, if you believe in what the diaconate is doing and how people are being led into ministry and into loving people and loving Jesus and finding Jesus in the margins, then this is a campaign you're going to want to support, because I truly believe in that last goal and the transformation part.
Well, let's expand on this, because this is important. And you're right. You've said this. I've heard you say this. I've heard Bishop Curry say this. I've heard Bishop Wright here in the Diocese of Atlanta. say this, that the future of the church is tied up in the diaconate. So let's dive into that a little more deeply.
So I was born in 1959. I'll just be straight out there with it. And so I remember the church of the 60s and then the church of the 70s, where the biggest thing we argued about was the Green Book and the New Prayer Book and the Zebra Book, and whether or not we could actually have folk songs as a hymn. I mean, and I look back at those days frankly, some people look back at it as the good old days. I don't. I think we were talking about a bunch of not extremely important to Jesus things, and ignoring the fact that the world was changing around us. And the world did change. The world has changed tremendously in the past 50, 60 years. For the most part, I think for the better. But the church was kind of slow at changing with it, frankly. And I think part of that was because we were very entrenched in what we already did. We were used to people who joined the Elks Club, who joined the Lions Club, who joined the Country Club, who, they were joiners. And so they joined a church. All we ever had to do was, distinguish ourselves from the church down the street, have a better choir, have a bigger organ, be more welcoming to if you had small children, that kind of thing. Have a cool youth group. And that's just not true anymore. The church is at a place now where basically we have to prove our relevance. And frankly, I think the church, the gospel, the words of Jesus are more relevant now than they ever have been. When I worked at Church of the Common Ground, I did a Bible study in a downtown park on Wednesdays. And I remember as we would explore the gospel readings together, it struck me over and over every single week just how hungry for the love of God people were. Just starving for it. I mean, literally starving. They needed that so much more than food, even more than shelter. They felt bad about themselves. They felt bad about their circumstances. They would say terrible things about themselves, and they needed to hear every single day how much God loved them deeply, completely, and to the end of their days, that there was nothing they could do that would separate themselves from that love, which was a very different message than they'd been getting from everyone else. And I have since discovered that is a message that people need to hear no matter what. It's not just people who have found themselves in dire straits economically who need to hear that. My neighbors need to hear that. People who are striving to, become an influencer needs to hear that. They need to hear, I need to hear it, frankly, how much God loves me and created me, and how I can be all that God created me to be if I can just live into that love. That's so relevant now. That's so needed now. And it's not the people in pews always who need to hear that. And if we just sit in the pews and wait for someone to walk in and sit next to us, that's not going to happen. Well, it happens sometimes, but it doesn't happen very often. If you go out and you learn, and people learn that they can access the love of God without barriers through you and through the gospel and through Jesus, that is something they will eat up. Mm. And when I say without barriers, I mean not just that, the Episcopal Church welcomes all. I mean that it removes barriers, not just between you and God, but between you and all that God created you to be. Mm. All those barriers of self-doubt, of anxiety, of anger, of disappointment, of bitterness, all those barriers can go away when people are truly living into and feeling and knowing the love of God. So that's why I think that deacons are one of the best to bring that message out. We are ordained to proclaim that. That is, I always remember in Ezekiel that piece where the burning coal is placed on the lips, and it's because this should fill you up with a fire to spread that gospel, that news to people. And those people are on the margins. Those people are outside the church, and we need to bring them to the love of God.
And deacons are tasked, they take a vow, us deacons, to find those people. And so that's really the point of why we're here, is that work, that effort needs support. And that's what this campaign is all about.
That's right.
Yeah. Carole,
and
wow.
to help lay people take that message into the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Say more about that before we, as we wrap it up. I want you to say more about that, because it's not just about deacons, it's about how deacons help the laity in the church. But let's talk about the laity.
So, often I'll get asked, what's the difference between just your baptismal vows and your diaconal vows? I would say that one of the main differences is that the deacons are ordained into the church as leaders of the church. And so while we're all called to carry that message of love into the world, to live that message of love into the world, deacons are actually set apart by the church as leaders, so as people who can help you learn how to do that. Mm. So we're not trying to make everyone in the Episcopal Church a deacon. That would be crazy. I can't. That would be chaos. Because we'd all be anyway. You need deacons, you need priests, you need bishops, and you need laity. And if you don't have any one of those, I think you're out of balance. But while priests are pastors to the laity, we are leaders to the laity when it comes to teaching them how to live into those baptismal vows. We don't do it for you. But if you want to go out and get your fingernails dirty, I can take you there.
Wow, Carole, this has been great. I can't imagine that there aren't some folks that have the fire. You're talking about the fire, Ezekiel's fire. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about how folks can connect. For those that are interested, can they be in touch with you, and how can they do that?
Well, if you go to the Association for Episcopal Deacons website, you can get in touch with me through that. I'm, as you mentioned, I think Vice President of AED and incoming president. And so you can always access me through the website. While you're there, you can actually become a part of advancing the diaconate. We are asking that if you're not a member, you become a member. And if you're already a member, membership is just the entry point, right? If you're already a member, give some annual gift to AED to help us grow into what all the deacons can be and do. And you can also explore how to put the fund in your planned giving. So I would recommend you go to the website, explore it if you haven't before, and you can definitely contact me through that.
Thank you. And just to be clear, folks, you do not have to be a deacon to be a member of AED. You do not have to be a deacon to put the fund in include the fund in your planned giving, in your will or estate or what have you. So that's not a requirement. As Carole said, if you love deacons and you love the work of deacons and you believe what Carole has talked about, you're part of this campaign. So come join us. We would love to have you. Archdeacon Carole Maddux, this has been awesome. I'm always inspired when I listen to you, and I know those that have heard you today will be inspired as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I love talking about the diaconate.
And we love listening to you talk about the diaconate. So thank you again for joining us, Carole. And folks, again, I'm Deacon John Ray for Advancing the Diaconate. Please join us on future episodes of this series. We'll be appreciative of your support. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Advancing the Diaconate. This series is a joint production of the Association for Episcopal Deacons and the Fund for the Diaconate, who support deacons and their ministries today and tomorrow. Join them and add your support for deacons.